I think when first-time founders have to think about fundraising, they're probably thinking one check at a time. How do I get to my seed round? As someone who's built a number of businesses, I wouldn't start one unless I knew where $250 million was coming from. Can you build a business that actually works for the business model of venture capital, which most people don't understand? There's two parts to this. What's the relationship between a founder and a venture capitalist? And I don't want to deal with it when it's who's willing to give you money, because it's not a transaction, it's a relationship. When we go into this relationship, we have a fiduciary responsibility to forget the money thing, that's it. Over in Europe, there's less aggression towards failure.
So how can people who want to build J-curve startups change their approach to failure?
The first thing is
stripping it back to basics. What is product market fit?
there's product market fit, founder market fit, and there's also investor market fit. If you look at Andreessen Horowitz, they won't invest in someone unless they have. I can say that I've seen people ridiculously fail at scaling, and the trick is always
Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. And could you kick us off by sharing a little bit about yourself and what should the audience know?
Yeah, of course, AJ. It's so nice to see you again. So obviously my name is James. I think if I were to offer my whistle stop tour, I was an engineer for half a decade, so a very technical person at the beginning, mentored by the guy that built eBay and product, and then went on to build a business that, as a product leader, sold for $500 million. And after that, a bit of a time in venture capital, 3 businesses under my belt, and now I spend a lot of my time on sort of 3 key things. So one is I'm deeply involved helping an impact business be wonderful as a VP there, sitting on the advisory board of one of the big AI businesses, and then also just really trying to help Europe level up. So heavily invested in anything that will help our ecosystem thrive.
That is a very succinct intro. Have you practiced that?
People ask me sometimes.
A couple of times. Mentored by the founder of eBay?
Well, the person that built eBay's products, right? So The founders of eBay have a very interesting separate story, but Marty Kagan was the person who built Netscape, the browser, and then went on to build eBay and a few other incredible things. But he is the person that pioneered how we build products out of the valley. And I was very fortunate to meet him very, very young in my career, early 20s, because the CTO of a business I was in stepped out of it, and they went, would you mind going to meet this person at a special leadership event? There's 10 people going. And we got on really well, and I've seen him a few times since. And, it was great to have that level of mentorship very early in my career.
What did your relationship look like? Did you have regular calls? You said you met him a couple of times.
Yeah, so whenever Marty was in London, I dare say he met quite a few people. So whether or not he would view it as mentorship as much as this guy annoyed me and we spent lots of time together. But there was a time in London when a lot of the great people out of San Francisco would come back to give their energy into our industry. So Alexander Osterwalder, who built Business Model Canvas with Steve Blank, Dave Gray, who pioneered all of the organizational change from Explainer, Marty Kagan, who essentially pioneered product management. And there were a few of them, and it was very nice that once you started to get into that environment, sort of, we're talking early 2010s here, the people that wrote the books were around and you could meet them, only a couple of times a year and you had to know where to go. But it was incredible to actually be able to face off against these people and challenge their ideas as I was building companies.
So that leads me nicely into the next question, which is around how do you get the most out of a mentorship relationship like that? Because you don't assume that you're going to go to an event and stumble upon somebody who could be an incredible mentor, and therefore we have to be prepared with how we're going to structure this relationship and how you're going to make sure that you get the most out of the short time that they have to give you.
Yeah, so I think when you're trying to build great mentorship for yourself, I think there's the founder answer, and then there's the everyone else answer. And so with the founder answer, the challenge you have is that you're building a company so quickly, you want the person that can help you exactly at that point. It might be the best mentor you could have is someone that will help you raise money because you don't know how to do it. It might be the best mentor you have is someone who can help you find product market fit. It might be the best mentor you have, et cetera, right? You can imagine how you need to say, what is the actual stage I'm at as a founder? and who can help me for just that part. Whenever founders come to me and sort of talk about advisory boards or even board seats, I say, who's going to help you for 12 months? Don't let it last longer than that. It should explode. And you should then sit down with that person and say, what's the ROI for both of us for the next phase? Because otherwise you end up stuck with the wrong people for a long time, especially if you're a successful person who wants to let go of that. So actually building almost more of a transactional relationship, but super high value, super intimate, is the way that I think founders should do this. When it comes to non-founders, it's more like a coach. And you sort of look at the people you employ and say, what could help this person feel challenged and rewarded outside of the time I can give them? And that actually becomes a lot more kind of progressive. You know, if you have a really good framework around where you want that person to get to, the coaches that you can employ, and that can be a paid activity, right? Mentorship is a bit more complicated, but you'll get all the same benefits. It's just with founders, it's really complicated because it's constantly changing and evolving. With other people, the right coach will probably take them all the way through.
Okay. And so what stage did he help you through?
Well, I think with Marty Kagan specifically, I knew nothing about product management, and I got the job of a product manager. So it was quite timed because I would say that in the company I was in at the time, people didn't necessarily trust or respect me that much. It was a very young organization. Everyone was given lots of responsibility. That's how startups work. But it wasn't like I was brought in as a leader in that activity. And so my exposure to people like Alexander Osterwalder and Marty Kagan kind of taught me the best way of doing it, which then meant I suddenly could emit based on my role. So they really helped me to solidify the fact that I can do, speaking frankly, do startup things really well. And I wasn't a founder for that era, right?
What exactly does doing startup things well look like to you?
Well, it's a really good question. Obviously, it's a large question. From my point of view, doing startup things well is probably in two categories. The first piece is, can you build a business that actually works for the business model of venture capital, which most people don't understand? And then obviously the second thing is, can I actually build a wonderful business? Like, that's what doing startup things well is. If you can do something that's a venture capital business, but it's a really crappy business, it's going to explode just a lot later and very famously. You know, it doesn't mean it needs to have good unit economics. It's a different point. The venture capital model is very specifically structured, right? It's a 10-year horizon to a liquidity event that results in everyone getting a great return on the capital they put in. In the founder's case, it's capital and time.
So I'd love to double click on each of those sides. You've obviously had a lot of time on both sides of the table. What does it mean to build a venture-backable business?
Sure. Well, I think there's two parts to this, right? So let's just look at the first question. What's the relationship between a founder and a venture capitalist? You know, where is that actually met? And I don't want to deal with it when it's who's willing to give you money. Let's actually look at the truth of this, because it's not a transaction, it's a relationship. So if you're looking at the relationship, you are essentially brought into doing one activity. And there was a very notable venture capitalist called Tim Jackson in the UK, who again was someone that taught me an incredible amount. That's when I was doing my VC piece. And about the time I was about to step on my first board in that capacity, it was really clearly explained to me that when we go into this relationship, we are doing it with essentially a single activity. We have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize the value of the shareholding. That's actually what we're doing, right? And loads of people think, you know, it's about building boards and politics, but actually it's literally, it's like another little company. You're going in to maximize the shareholding. If you're not meeting and doing that activity, you and the VC and the founder aren't actually making the relationship work. And when some of that rips apart or misjudges itself, that's when you see lots and lots of problems and different sides get lots of poor reputations. But really, that is the single bond. So if you're building a startup, a venture-backable business, and you're talking about VC and founder, forget the money thing, that's it. We have come together because we believe we can maximize the shareholding. And the shareholding is this business, right? The second part to that, like what is a VC-backable business? That means that the venture capital model, which is to say that I will give you a fixed amount of money over X number of times, will result in something that completes the power law. And the power law is that essentially of 10 investments I make, 1 or 2 of them will return the fund. So if you're building a business that does not follow the power law, it's not a venture backable business. And at any point it could fall out of it or into it, but you have to understand that. This is where you end up with zombie companies at Series C, because actually they can't produce the return for the 10 years. They've built a wonderful lifestyle business with VC money. And so that's where, again, you end up with this really weird rending, because startups, realistically, are by definition venture backable businesses. The alternative is you build a lifestyle business. There's nothing wrong with those. They're not venture backable businesses. Like, find a way to get it started, find a way to get capital that doesn't require you in 10 years to give back X number of times it. And that's, again, where you see a big issue, because founders, especially first-time founders, will start to try and solve a big problem, either a problem they feel themselves or a problem they see in the world, without actually asking this question. What am I going to do with 1 million, then 15 million, then 50 million, then 250 million sequentially? And how is it going to return? Actually, if you can't start to answer that question on day one, have you actually built a venture backable business, or have you found a nice problem you want to solve with someone's money?
And so the misalignment that happens is usually founders selling a lifestyle business as a startup.
Or being unable to maximize the shareholding. Maybe it is a business that could work in the venture capital model, but you have to run it that way, right? Because the other thing is you might not build the right company, which comes to, how you build a great organization, how you actually get something to move that fast. A classic thing kind of put on the VC side is, can I put capital to work, right? And it goes all the way through. An LP is going to give you money that needs to leave that venture capital fund and be put to work. On top of that, a VC is going to give a startup money and they need to put the capital to work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So from a zoomed out perspective, VC is honoring the LP commitments whenever we're thinking about a venture backable business, because they're saying, I'll put your capital you gave to me to work. And then the startup is going, I told you I'd spend it in 12 months. I did. It sounds really stupid, but if you aren't actually building that way, you're not building a venture backable business. It's why the global macroeconomic environment now is tough, because you could argue it's trying to push against the power law. But if you cut as a first-time founder and it takes you 25 years to get to the same outcome, you broke the power law. Forget the VC being upset because they told you not to do it, but you needed to do it anyway. The LP's like, the venture capital fund failed. Do you see? The power law can never fall over. So you actually have to get it still to work.
And so the difference comes down to the attitude with which the founder approaches building their business.
I think the big difference between founders who understand this and who don't is probably a piece of education. If you go over to the West Coast, people understand that it's either going to do that and it's going to be a J-curve, or it's zero, right? And that's why things like startup M&A are really prolific in the Valley, because they bundle each other up and big eats small and they build the curve any way they can, right? Only the strong survive. Over in Europe, we have less education of this because there's less aggression towards failure in a positive and negative sense. We're quite conservative by design. It's our culture. So it's harder to do this.
And so how can people who want to build J-curve startups change their approach to failure?
Well, I think there's a load of ways startups can change their approaches to failure. The first thing is probably just by starting out knowing that they should turn it off if it's not working, which I don't think many people kind of understand. It's hopes and dreams. And again, that's where serial entrepreneurs are a lot more backable, because they say, you give me the money, it's either going to work or I'll give it back. Speaking frankly, we're going to get this done, right? Which is a big difference, right? But for first-time founders, they should jump over to the West Coast. They should actually just spend a couple of weeks there on someone's couch and be like, day in the life. Ideally before they start their business, because just the ethic around what's acceptable and unacceptable over there is very different. I'm not trying to say that American startups are better than European startups. I'm just trying to say that the cultural exposure is very important in building a great business. Speaking frankly, they started with a head start. So you should drink that Kool-Aid, come back and figure it out for yourself.
What's an example of something that's not accepted over there that's different from here?
Well, people ask me a big question around the US and UK divide, and I always give an example of at least how I've operated when thinking about the West Coast, which is when I am connected to the West Coast and we talk about helping each other, if I offer someone advice or someone offers me advice, we're likely going to catch up in a week's time, and the expectation is that advice was taken, executed, and there'll be feedback. Right? Otherwise, you're not either listening when I'm trying to help you, or speaking frankly, you're not going to move fast enough for this to be a good relationship. So the expectation of decision-making and productivity is very high. In Europe, you can give someone some nice bit of advice, and a month later you can say, how are you getting on with it? And you won't get anything back, right? Now, that's quite a broad, stereotypical statement, but you asked for a difference. Cultural expectations in the West Coast are you're always moving. Does mean there's a bit of false positive behavior and everyone's made it, which everyone sort of talks about. But the truth of the matter is status quo. Over here, not really that at this time. That's my experience, at least. Doesn't mean that everyone gets it right in the West Coast, right? You might give someone some advice, or you might get some help and you can't execute on it, and you know you've damaged that relationship. Or vice versa, they've done anything and you won't talk to them again. But that's the transparency of we are all going to move the dial.
It sounds like there's almost just it feels like there's a bigger hunger.
I don't know if the question is about hunger, but there's definitely a clear association with the amount of traction you need to have to be successful in certain environments in America. Over here, it's a bit more fuzzy. I don't think the expectations are lower. It's just a bit more fuzzy because we haven't really defined it clearly yet. We're getting there.
And what does their clear definition
As
sound
in the rules by which you get the next investment, the business moves forward, like they're realistically the same. The power law is global, right? So what gives you the next chunk of money or the next proof point for yourself as a founder, first time or otherwise, pretty universal. The difference is that you've got a lot of people who also get it straight away and will click with you in some bits of the world. In other bits, it's a bit lonely, it's a bit siloed. And as you know, I'm a big person on communities, so I am attuned to seeing the differences that happen in networks. That's all we're really acknowledging. We're not saying one is better or worse. It's just, it's so clear there because every single person will work and hum the same way. So that's a really interesting network effect. As you can imagine, as I'm sure many first-time founders will say, when I'm in Europe, it's a bit lonely and there's loads of different people. It doesn't necessarily feel like we're all like the same type of founder working the same kind of way on the same kind of goal. Everyone is in different structures. And you can sort of feel that, especially in places like London, positively and negatively, right? Positively for diversity, negatively because, you know, if it was all just dialed up to 10, you're probably going to end up with a productivity mandate that's much easier for everyone to feel and understand. Whether or not that would grow or shrink the ecosystem, I actually don't know.
Okay, wow. I love how much you've zoomed out and looked at this problem from a bird's eye view. I'd love to touch on one thing you said, which was I caught myself thinking, oh, I don't know what to do in that situation, which is when you said, a founder has to know what to do if they get given 1 million, 5 million, 50 million or 50 million or 100 million. Mm-hmm. How do you think about breaking down that problem of knowing what to do with certain amounts of money?
So I think when first-time founders have to think about fundraising, they're probably thinking one check at a time. How do I get to my seed round, right? As someone who's built a number of businesses, I wouldn't start one unless I knew where $250 million was coming from, even if it's in a couple of years. So that's not a particularly hard problem necessarily, right? You would go talk to people that have raised 250 million and said, what did you have to do? What did it look like? How did you get it? Who did you get it from? Additionally, if you're a capable person with means, you'll go talk to those other people who gave them the money and said, why did you give them the money? What does that look like? And if I'm doing this, why would you give me 250 million? No one has any skin in the game, right? It's just a very direct question to say, what's valuable enough you do this? I don't think many first-time founders are thinking like that. But realistically, if you play the game, you're never not raising money, right? So if you didn't know what you were doing next, you completely fall off the momentum train. It's just one part of startups, obviously. But if you're thinking about this and you don't know where it is, you have a bit of a problem. Now, obviously, you can cheat, right? Lots of notable people who are founders out there have found a wonderful billionaire who just went all the way through, Tesla, SpaceX, they have notable singular individuals that make it all possible. But it's not an excuse. It's just saying there is a cheat code if you can find a wonderful person that will do the lot, but otherwise you still need the answer to the question.
It's also putting yourself in the shoes of whoever's giving you the money, because they're obviously looking for their return. They need you to see that you're going to carry on raising future rounds and eventually exit someday. And so you need to have that planned out because that's what they're thinking about.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you don't know the answer for how you're making 300 million a year, that's an interesting problem you've got. Have you really thought about your business enough to know you can hit the power law?
That is such a great question for my arsenal that I'm going to take through to any founder community events, see how people react, because I think that's a very telling litmus test of a question.
Yeah, and again, you go off and talk to the Americans and they're like, what about 500 billion?
Yeah.
And it's like bigger is a cultural concept. Over here, 50 million is not much, right? It really is not much. It's not a power returning factor of any kind. Your business is too small. I'm sorry.
Wow. Taking a step now back away from fundraising and thinking about the business itself and the relationship the business has with its customers through its product, which is where you have a vast amount of experience. So stripping it back to basics, what is product market fit to you?
So when I think about product market fit, I'm thinking about you have a problem that you have identified that you can solve with a solution that people say they want to buy. And you have a credible way of getting to enough of those people that one day you can make a venture backable return.
Okay. And also then, how do you break down this process? Do you have a hierarchy of what feels like it makes the biggest impact on finding product market fit?
So finding product market fit is very unique to the founder. I'd actually say there's like a few big heavenly bodies with this. So there's product market fit. Can you actually make a thing that makes the whole shebang work? There's founder market fit. Is this the person that can do it? Some people are great at working with the average Joe public. Some people are really good at cracking enterprises, right? Very few can do both. So let's assume no one can do both unless you've already done one, right? And then there's also investor market fit, which is, I'm doing all that, I'm the right person to do it. Actually, is the money and everything else going to work because I can find it and it wants to be put to work in this space? Right now you could argue that investor market fit is AI stuff, right? In 2024, 2023, 2025. There's loads of other investor market fits, and then there are some things that you really shouldn't be doing right now. You could argue that social networks are never investor market fit, and that's why they are insane outliers. So actually understanding where all these spectrums sit together is really important for trying to answer that question as a stack, because you kind of need to green light bits of all of that. If you've got red lights across any of it, well, I don't know where you are. Fix something.
Yeah, of course. We'll come back to all the different layers, but why is social networks not investor market fit?
Social networks are not normally investor market fit because there's only really one viable business model: ads. The only way the ads unit economics work is if you have 1 billion people using a thing. There aren't many of those in the world, and historically there haven't been many in the world. It's not like you can go after a vertical with a thesis, right, and say, hey, I'm someone with loads of experience in, biotech. I'm going to go into the biotech space and do something, and I find biotech investors. The issue with social networks is it's the everyone problem. You have to find a universal thing that everyone wants to do for a very, very long time, right? Which is why you keep seeing them pop up, they get a little bit of money, they fall over. And most investors will do it once or twice and be very, very against it. Network effects and social networks are very, very different things, right? Network effects businesses, there are loads of. That's really interesting. Social networks, there's like a couple that exist, and you really do need to figure out what that next one might be. My normal personal thesis on this is it's generational. So have we solved social networks for millennials through their entire lifetime? Have we solved social networks for the generation below that, for the generation below that? You can think about it generationally, but realistically, if an entire billion people do something one way and are happy, there is no problem to solve. So that's why they're never really investor market fit, apart from maybe once every 15 years.
So at what point, I'd love to challenge the notion that advertising is the only way that social networks, like the most logical way for them to run their business. Because at the other end, I see communities, which is still a network, just a lot smaller, and you add more to the experience than just your digital experience.
Sure.
And there are multiple. There are. The only other way I can think that jumps out at me is you pay membership fees. So why wouldn't membership fees work as a model for social networks?
If you can make 300 million a year and return the power law, then yes.
But no one's managed to do it.
I'm trying to think of precedents that exist, but I don't know of any. Maybe they do, and I am wrong. But if we were playing the basic rules of building a company, companies need to be pretty simple. They're scary, hard, high-risk things to do. So, going against any macro is hard. Going with a macro is logical. This specifically one would be making, in my opinion, a new precedent, which is like making a new macro, if it even is possible.
And the macro is that social networks are free.
The macro is that we have social networks that run for free with an advertising model for 1 billion people where they are the inventory. And that is the model, right? That is the macro for how everything has scaled, and historically that's how it's worked. You would have to invent a new way that you can get to $300 million. I'm picking 300 million arbitrarily. With inflation, the number unfortunately keeps going up, right? So in this regard, I don't have anything that a first-time founder would need to consider other than I would still say it is the hardest hard problem you can do. And there are many, many wonderful businesses a first-time founder could do. Maybe their tricky second album should be a social network.
That tricky second album. I love that. Talking about de-risking the process of building companies, how do you break down founder market fit and investor market fit into a bit more detail?
So when it comes to founder market fit, it's really interesting if you actually look at how other people are approaching this from a VC point of view, right? The whole thing is VC, LP, founder, all that sort of stuff. And if you look at Andreessen Horowitz, as I understand it, they won't invest in someone unless they have 5 years of trying to understand the problem, right? So a hope and a dream person coming up with a good idea does not get investment. If you are in biochemistry and you have 5 years in it, then you start to have enough knowledge of a founder market fit that we are essentially investing in that experience, right? Serial entrepreneurs are a little different because they are sort of semi-transposable, but one assumes they can build the team that has that. And if they don't have a founding team with that, then you kind of question how have they de-risked themselves so quickly for the second thing they do, or fifth or whatever, right? So it's a little more tricky, but for first-time founders, founder market fit is that you understand that industry cold, whether it's B2B or B2C, right? If you're building an e-commerce and you have no e-commerce experience, the person next to you with 5 years e-commerce experience is going to blow you out of the water, even if they start a year later. So founder market fit does need to be what in your life have you invested in that space that means you can credibly out-execute the thing that's going to come up behind you.
And then investor market fit?
I think investor market fit is down to the ability for investors to understand the thing you want to build. And this is very personable. This is why, you run around and people say no to you as a first-time founder, and then someone says, yes, I get it. If you explain something as a company, a problem you want to solve, a vision, a mission, whatever you frame the thing as, normally it's not very understandable. People will only invest in things they understand. And so the way that you can look at that is two parts. One is every person you talk to, you say, what don't you understand? And you become and increase the investor market fit. The second thing is you go off and find investors that will loosely understand what you're talking about, right? If you and I want to go off and build biochemical weapons, to be extreme, realistically, 90% of
tell them all our idea.
Yeah, 90% of the investors in the world do not understand the business, even if it's worth $1 billion, no brainer, right? Now, they could understand certain things, like if we had a 50 million contract on our hand, that makes the business a bit more understandable-ish, but you can still see it's really hard to help people understand how a biochemical weapons business is really a good thing for investor market fit. Sure, there's ethics and other bits and bobs, but let's just look on understandability or how understandable something is, right? And that's why it takes a long time, and really great fundraisers make things really relatable. But investor market fit is normally like, how close can the person understand what the heck you're trying to do? Because at the beginning, it sounds nuts, for being honest.
But then the challenge is the best companies all sound nuts at the start. To quite a lot of people, like Airbnb is a classic example of the breakout success that everyone was like, that's mental.
Yes, this becomes a really complicated point where there are lots and lots and lots of very valuable, very successful businesses, and then there's like 10 businesses everyone knows about. I personally love the amount of serendipity and luck that comes into some companies' formations. I'm not trying to say I can now create more serendipity and luck than anyone else, right? Airbnb got stuck on so many problems. Slack is a much better example, right? Slack started as a computer game. And it was a computer game social network, and it sucked. And then Stuart realized the one thing that was working really well was the chat piece. So then, as I remember, he went over to MetaLab and went, could you build me this product so we can then do Slack? And if you go to MetaLab's website, you'll see they talk all about how they came up with the solution from sort of almost a game to Slack, right? That's an impossible jump. No one ever could have backed or figured that out, right? I don't think backing serendipity makes so much sense for a first-time founder. You've come up with a great idea. I think it's worth saying, yes, it could be a sweet shop tomorrow. That's what pivoting is, right? Building around serendipity is tough. You're trying to go into a mission and vision area, not trying to replicate Airbnb. If for some reason you end up with Airbnb, great, but you should never have not been trying to build something that fulfills the power law. Does it make sense?
Yes. I understand the power law part. I suppose the bit I'm still not quite grasping is the how easily understandable it is from the investor's perspective.
Sure, but so if you're a first-time founder trying to build a business, you need to make it understandable and relatable and something that gets given money.
Yeah.
That's just a status quo. Just keep working on a conversation that then people just understand, or find the people that are going to get it quickly. Back to picking a ridiculous niche, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that anyone is trying to build a business that pivots into a breakout company. Yeah. You cannot control those dynamics, and most of the most successful businesses that everyone talks about fulfill that. They are a very small number of all the world's unicorns, right?
Got you.
So you don't like to build a business that you're going to completely change every 5 minutes until it becomes something random that makes loads of money. Is a really bad way of running a company, as you can imagine. Therefore, you just wait and you assume that if you find a significant thing you learn that no one else knows, you'll test it really quickly. It's not related to fundraising, which is what we were talking about.
Mm. And that it sounds like that's the middle of the Venn diagram where investor market fit meets product market fit, and you invest in the founder who you trust when they pivot. They're not just following a whim, and there's a reason behind it.
Yeah. I mean, pivoting is the importance of understanding you were doing it wrong and changing really quickly, right? Anything pre-Series B, in my opinion, is default dead. There are no... I have met a couple product market fit businesses at Series A, but I think back to the requirements, to say you've cracked all of that stuff is very rare. Early stage, can we give you money to build something fast enough that could be valuable? The next thing, could we give you some money to make sure that that's actually is valuable so you can go make a bit of money out of it? And then could we give you more money so you could actually go and see how fast you can get hold of everything before someone beats you? At the point you've done all of that, maybe you have a chance of being default alive. As a first-time founder, if you can do that in 3 years or less, you're doing really well. Right?
Beautiful segue into now scaling and org design. Can you remind us of your scaling experience?
So, I mean, I've been involved in scaling loads of different companies. I wouldn't necessarily just drop loads and loads of names of people that may have asked for help or I may have jumped into in the last 10 years. But I can say that I've seen people ridiculously fail at scaling, and I have been asked to help a few times. And the trick is always pretty much in two parts. It's the organization of people you've built, and it's the leadership team. Those are the two areas where something has gone wrong and something needs to change. For a first-time founder trying to figure these things out, you probably just want to survive long enough to start having these problems, to be honest. So there's a 0 to 1. There's a cold start of like, who are the first 10 people and how does that work? But scaling, normally you need to figure out the issue. So a little example, right? If you look at what happens a lot in, say, non-European businesses, actually founders will like a certain era and be really, really engaged in it. There are some people that just love 0 to 1. Give me some money, I'll make an amazing first product, I'll crack into a market, and the second you need to hire 400 people, I'm out. Like, I don't do bureaucracy, I'm not going to do all the politics, but what I will do is spend all my time at the beginning making wonderful, crazy things where 90% of them don't work, but I'll just keep going because it's so fun, right? The flip would be your scaling person, which is, you know what, I don't play with stuff that's going to become a sweet shop tomorrow. Give me something that looks like good raw material, a bit rubbish, and I will find a way to operationalize the heck out of it, put loads of capital to work to make that resilient and get it up to a point where it's really firing on all cylinders. But, you know, above X number of people or X amount, I don't want to deal with something where it's going to make me run on 10 time zones. I'm just not that person, right? And then that last one is like, I don't touch anything unless it's humming, and what we're looking for is world domination. You know, there's a bunch of people you'll find who are really good at IPOing businesses, right? You don't really put them in anything less or more. They're just really good at being the executive who will take a business public and make the big liquidity event everyone's looking for. 0.1% of people can do all of it and be happy. Back to the most important part of this, right? You're going to spend your entire life in this world. Why would you be stuck in misery for 10 years when you really like the fun stuff at the beginning? Or vice versa. Why would you sit yourself at the beginning over and over and over and over again, failing constantly, if you don't enjoy making stuff? Jump up a bit and only stay where you get happiness, right? And that there's a real question here in terms of scaling for like, is the leadership team the one that can do these things, right? And it's where if you hear the bad side of this, especially as a first-time founder, it's like, oh, the VC will throw me out if I'm not doing my job. But honestly, I believe it's way more attuned to happiness and value. Great founders are exponentially good at certain things. Very, 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 very few want to go all the way and would say that made them happy. If you go talk to some, even now, that have been in it 10 years and say, are you really happy with what you're doing? Or did you like that bit or this bit? You end up with some really good stories. So it depends. The scaling piece is that, and then obviously the other piece of scaling is, well, I need to build a wonderful business. Have I set it up for success? Does it have all the right people? Do they work all the right ways? And that's the bit below.
So what's the right stage of business for you?
I don't know yet. At 38, I have fun in all of them. I don't think I want to choose yet. I have worked in lots of different phases and I get pulled into them all the time. I think my problem is slightly different personally, as someone who's stupid enough to keep trying to build businesses, if I'm honest, right? Like most people do one and go, ouch, I'm not doing that again. And I'm like, I hope to start my last business at 85, right? I have no interest in not ever building a business. The issue I face is I like really hard problems. So if I build a business as an employee, an entrepreneur, it doesn't really matter, right? We're just talking about making wonderful companies. If I'm involved in something, it needs to be really complicated, lots of hard problems, and it needs to be moving really quickly so we can have a lot of that value creation. My mental health goes through the floor if things don't change. So I'm also very, very destructive in certain types of businesses, irrespective of stage, right? I don't know if a first-time founder ever figures out that until they've been doing this a little while. But yeah, I very much like jumping in and fixing them. You could argue I'm far more of a private equity mindset person than a venture capital mindset person because I just like the hardest, most aggressive problems and fixing them, whether they're people, process, products, capital. That's why I like climate, because climate's really, really, really hard. Can you name the number of commercially viable climate businesses in the world? Question mark, right? So,
what drives this passion for business that means that you never want to stop?
So personally, as someone who has continuously kept trying to build businesses, whether they're successful or not, the point is I continuously keep trying, right? Or I jump into businesses and continually keep trying to improve them. So right now, I'm an employee. I'm not a founder right now. I'm in a really interesting climate business. I would say that my job is the most funnest fun thing I do, in brackets, and my wife and kids. So why would I not do the most fun thing I have? I have no concept of this idea that retirement is a good thing, right? But you're also talking to someone who didn't take a bank holiday or not work Christmas until they were 35. Not because I'm trying to punish myself. I just love work, right? I'm not trying to say that's healthy or right or a role model, but everyone does what makes them happy, or I hope they do. And so when I look at these things, work is fun. If work is not fun, I change it. It just so happens that the hardest problems invariably involve being a founder of a business, right? That's my only alignment to the thing. It's just where the thing clicks.
I love that. Actually seems like a very healthy approach to work. If it's not fun, then change it. And therefore, if it's the most fun thing, do it as much as you want to, which is usually a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the son of two entrepreneurs, right? So at least I understood what it was. I didn't do it to make money. I didn't do it because I thought, wow, this is the thing that my CV needs to look like. You look at my CV and you're like, what the heck has this guy been doing? Venture capitalist, founder, product advisor, back to the PE thing, because I like the concept of PE because of the risk aversion to it. They don't make mistakes, right? It's a very different model to venture capital where you swing for the fences and hopefully you hit the stars or the moon or whatever the analogy is these days, right? PE is almost like we will make no risks, but we will deploy incredible energy and something will then become something much greater. That's essentially finding super, super, super hard, almost forensic grade problems and executing on them. So again, I'm pretty ambivalent on which place to go. I just find hard problems fun.
I'd love to rewind a little bit and go back to what you spoke about when scaling, which is organisation of people and the leadership team. You touched on the leadership team briefly, which is basically the question of, are we the best team to get this company to the next stage?
Are we the best team to maximize the shareholding?
Can you clarify the difference between the next stage and the shareholder value? How would you distinguish the two?
There's a big difference between getting to the next stage of a business and maximizing the shareholding. You could argue there's a bit of causality. If I do one, I get the other, but not if you're setting the mandate, right? Because maximizing the shareholding is pretty much linear. You could be stuck at one stage and take 10 years to get there. So that might be the team to do it, but it will actually end up failing. If you aren't meeting once a month to maximize the shareholding or are unable to do it on a very limited basis of time, I don't know if you're the right team. You don't get the luxury of we're building the best business, we've got the right people for the stage, if your only objective was 12 times a year we maximize, we increase the shareholding and maximize it relative to whatever that optic is. In our case, we talk about venture capital. It could be something else, but there's a bit of a difference there because actually you might have the right people in the right stage, but your business can't maximize the shareholding. Sorry, you just broke the power law.
Okay. So then thinking about the organization of people, how do you break down that problem?
Yeah, so obviously every company has a different setup. It's impossible to say this is the organization for a B2B business, this is the organization for a B2C business, at least in my opinion. Having seen so many people be very successful with crazy shaped solutions, it's actually asking a slightly different question, which is, for the job we're doing right now, what is the smallest number of people at the highest level of performance to get it done? And that becomes much, much, much harder to do as you scale, right? So the way that I look at it is from sort of the very beginning all the way through. So whenever people ask me, oh, how do you know who you're hiring is the right person? I say, put the person's grade relative to the stage. If they're seed stage, you need S grade people. If they're Series A, you need A grade people. If they're Series B, you need B grade people. If they're Series C plus, you need C grade people. And that sounds really weird, but the scope of the problem and the amount of value each individual must create relative to the size of the org actually does stack. If you put lots and lots of S people into a Series C company, they'll all churn out. There's no way they can operate fast enough or create enough impact, right? They are like 50 shiny people out of 500 people, and they are just going to rip the company apart because that's kind of what they were supposed to do over here, right? So that's how I kind of look at it. And it's the smallest number of people. You don't need a large headcount to achieve outsized returns. You need a high-performing team, high-performing organization. High-performing things are normally quite lean, just by design.
And so what employee headcount do you start noticing there to be some fat build-up in the team? And how do you stay on top of that?
It's a really good question. I mean, when you build your first business, you probably don't have a clue, if I'm honest. There's no way you can answer that question unless someone outside with more experience, like, I sit on advisory boards to do just that. And I'm like, probably half your company needs to go. There's no way you internally would know all of this because you're too busy building your business. So for someone who's early in it, I would say the answer is you need someone to be a critical friend. That's the language I would use. For people who are in it and are constantly tuned to it because they've done it wrong a few times, which is the only way you're really going to figure it out, you fight what's called organizational debt. Organizational debt is the fact that every time your business makes a fundamental change, whether it's an injection of capital, a pivot, a change, you have the last thing you did as debt. You hired people because you were a B2B business. Now you're a B2C business filled with B2B people. That's organizational debt. You'll try and pay the debt down, but the scaling fat will build because you have to keep making so many changes to get to where you need to as an outcome, right? It's why they end up being quite complicated places at Series B and C because you have such a big bunch of stuff that happened earlier, and you might not have actually refined the organization into that right shape that works really well at that size. Again, back to the point, you bring in a really great CEO at that stage who's like, no. Rewrite all the roles and responsibilities, restructure this. Great, we've tightened up the ship. It took 6 months. Let's go, right? You shouldn't have any organizational debt below Series A. You shouldn't have the money to keep it on. And B, you should be ruthlessly thinking about what's the smallest number of really great people, because I don't have more than 50. So it should be very controllable for 1 or 2 people in the business. I'm not saying who it is, but 1 or 2 people in the business to just know that's fine. Otherwise, your business is dead anyway. You're just not capital efficient. You can't put capital to work well.
And so is there a skill that, if we're to generalize, most founders would benefit a lot from learning as being more ruthless with regards to the team, the products?
I would say that, back to my mindset of doing it wrong, I have failed at building several businesses, right? I have learned the very hard way of walking into the door and saying, hello, everyone. Unfortunately, we didn't get there, and none of you have a job anymore. And that's pretty much on me for loads of reasons, but we're done, right? So in answer to your question, having got to that stage, because that's the hardest bit, right? And the company doesn't die then for like another year. So you sit in a little purgatory by yourself finishing things. I would say that it is the single greatest weakness of people who start businesses, that they aren't ruthless enough. Because you really don't want to get to that. And once you've done that once, you know you don't want to do that again. So you'd much rather just say, I'm sorry, it doesn't work, bye-bye. Like when I advise people to try and figure this out, I say that you will hire the best person you can with the time and resources available for that person to join your business. But you're making a bet. And the day they start, in your head, you need to fire them. That's what a probation period is for. You now have 90 days to rehire them if you were right. It's not 90 days for them, to survive the probation, which is what you're thinking, like, do they pass it? There's no passing. They default failed because you may have made a mistake. Now you need to see what happens. And wonderful people will be in the business. You'll welcome them, you'll care for them, you look after them. Anything that didn't work, if you haven't figured it out in 90 days, you've got a problem. So I think that that's the way you should approach it in any business. Apparently that is ruthless. I'm not going to lie. Back to maybe I'm more PE these days because I just see the risk and I want the reward of building a wonderful business as an employee or anyone else, right? But I do think that if you're trying to get people right, you have to be really aggressive on saying everyone has to earn a right to be here. And I've made a bet that in 90 days, they are still here.
I think there's a place for being very practical and assess the risk. And then there's a place to bring in the emotional side. So deciding that you need to cut half the team is the ruthless, much more rational, strategic move. Then how you go about cutting the team, you can be a lot more human-centered. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's a person in this, right? But at the end of the day, if someone is not the right person for your business, that is on you, right? Back to there's a ruthlessness, but there's no complete accountability. That's not their fault. You will have to care for this person, even if they're not into, staying in your business. But it's 100% on you. I was recently talking to a notable leader who fought tooth and nail to have someone join the business, and they won't pass their probation. And this person was in such self-doubt as to whether they could ever hire someone at that level again. And it's sort of my they're an experienced person. I sort of went, no, the reason you care so much about this means you're really good at this. Everyone makes mistakes. It is statistically impossible to hire 100% of the right people, and they will be happy and you will be happy with them. Just let it go, which is another part of it. You need to be fully accountable, fully embrace that, fully own that, but also be able to sleep at night. So the word ruthless is tough, but if you aren't decisive, which is probably a better word, everyone loses.
So how does a founder practice improving their decisiveness?
I think that this is just a skill you build up over time by, as I mentioned, making a lot of mistakes. When you learn the really hard way with your money, with other people's money, with your time, you can build this muscle. There is no magic to this. This is emotional, challenging bricks of making a great leader. They don't have to be a founder for this, right? So I think that there isn't a good answer, sadly, for people. Perseverance. Not resilience, perseverance. You have to just do enough miles.
Goes back to the simple truths, which easier said than done. So we've now spoken about who to hire and when to fire, and how we can do that most efficiently, or think about that most efficiently. Let's assume you've got the best people in the room to add shareholder value at the moment. How do you maximize the productivity between them?
So when you're building a business and you're trying to figure this out, whether you're a VP, a C, a head, you have people under you, right? You have a sort of responsibility to understand their potential and their performance. And your job is to actually be engaged with them enough that you can figure out where they sit on the spectrum. There's a really good tool you can use from Canada Inc., which talks about superstars and rockstars. And so if you research how Canada look at it, and obviously Canada Inc. invented radical candor, which many people know, but I actually think their performance models are the most important thing they share. Superstars are people that run around 10xing stuff all the time, They don't 1x stuff. They're not very good at that. They hate it. It's a problem. Whereas your rock stars are your dependables that continue to go forward over and over again. So your superstar would go into the call center and figure out how to make 5 times the number of people in there and make them effective, right? They can't just do one job. They just did everything. Your rock star will probably be the number 1 performing customer service agent that everyone loves, the customer success person that everyone says typifies success. It's really important there's 2 factors when you think about people, and everyone like this, right? One is that you have to respect what type they are. If you try and treat a rock star like a superstar, they get very unhappy. If you went, wow, you're the best performing customer success person, I'm going to give you 6 teams, I'm going to push you out of what you're doing today, you can be a leader, I'm on your progression framework. They didn't ask to be a superstar. If you actually said, how happy are you out of 10, they're probably going to say 9. So all you want to do is just remunerate them and say, just do what makes you really happy. You're brilliant at your job. And if anything ever changes on that front, let me know. That's how you would respect a rock star. With a superstar, realistically, you're going to have to feed them in every possible way that you need to. And at some point, they will reach the stratosphere and you cannot hold on to them. The worst thing you can do is try and hold back a superstar, right? Which is why you hear lots of notable people from notable companies become founders. Great, go off and do it. Don't try and keep hold of them. You're just burning them up, right? So the first part is you have to understand who someone is and what someone wants to do as an operating model to be happy in your company of people you've put together. You could, at the seed stage, just have superstars, but that is very hard to manage. We just talked about everyone hitting the stratosphere at once. You need to be really good at people to do that. Actually, a balance, even at the S stage, would be better. S-grade rock stars, S-grade superstars. Yeah, seed stage, the S class, right? They are the best of the best at what they do. So that's why they talk about a small number of really great people. But honestly, very few people can hold on to, say, 6 superstars at a pre-seed stage business that are really, really good and make that work. That's chaos. They can rip each other apart. Possible, very possible, but it's a very arrogant person with no people experience that thinks they can manage that, right? Because they're quite demanding. And rightfully so. The second thing that comes out of this path of figuring out the great people in your business is you go, what kind of person are you? And they can be in 3 modes. They can be in the tier 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1 means essentially they are over and above, right? You meet the rock star at the peak of their career and they're super happy and everything's ticking and they're great, right? Tier 2 is they're at kind of an averaged excellence. So they are doing what they're doing. It's predictable. It's great. It's not exponential rock star. It's not exponential superstar. Tier 3 is they're massively underperforming. So you meet a rock star and you go, my goodness, you're a rock star. And I don't know, just picking a stereotype, they've just come out of a business where they were really beaten up. Their manager hated them. They had lots of problems. They might come to you, but for what you want at the stage you're at, maybe you're not going to help them get to that next bit. They need to go figure that out and come back to you when they're in tier 2 or tier 1. It depends on what remit you're giving someone in a business, right? This is where you have to really understand that setup, because the default is I want S-class people in tier 1 mode who are all superstars forever. And that is a very dysfunctional organization, right? Back to the collection of people who have a very specific role where you're hiring at the right levels, right? Let's bring that to life quickly. It might be that you have a Series A company, you've raised a bit of money, you've got your Series A in place, but there's this one bit you're really uncertain of. Maybe it's, let's pick customer support because we were there before. You've never done it before. If you actually brought in a tier 1 rock star, so a really high performing rock star, and you didn't know what you were doing, maybe that person will leave, unless they're super high conviction on the journey, right? Actually, what you might want to do is pick someone who's in tier 3. They actually are in recovery. And you go, look, I actually don't know how this works. I'm going to give you the responsibility, but there's no pressure. I want you to help me build this. We figure it out together. And my assumption is that you'll kind of grow into really operating and smoothly humming on this. But I appreciate that you're really good, but you're now looking for some space. It's really hard to know where you operate because as a leader, you don't have to be the CEO or a founder. I think as a leader, you have to figure out what pieces am I going to give all the attention and spin and run at the level I want. Some stuff you just need to tick over and figure it out for the first time. Other stuff you just need running at 100 miles an hour. Can't falter, can't fail, right? back to the point of growing a business, that will all continue to shift around.
One thing I didn't quite fully understand is, why is the tier one rockstar leaving because you as a founder don't know how to build a successful customer service function?
So if you are a first-time founder or a first-time leader, like a really classic thing is you run a business and you give a leader a new function. Hey, I know you're the person that owns all the engineers. I need you to own the designers as well. Thanks. Right? And it could be you're a first-time founder that takes it all on, or it could be you've raised money and you're quickly getting a team together. You don't know how to manage designers as a head of engineering, right? If they're very high-performing designers, they are going to immediately default to, my boss does not understand what I'm doing. My boss does not respect me. It's really hard to get that to work, right? If you actually have a bit of room where you've got a mixture of people and you know how to manage them and they can kind of see you're building into that, maybe that would work. It becomes, you see how it suddenly becomes really nuanced in terms of who's managing who and what level and how does it structure in the Rubik's Cube. So it's really hard, back to the point, to default to the best tier one people in the best class at the best stage. Unless you have deep, deep experience in managing that, you actually need to be thinking about your business organically. Some of the best advice I was given is look at your people as a revenue center, not a cost center, right? And how does that work? How are you building that up? And when you think about how it's much, much easier for people when they build businesses to think like this, because you're like, okay, well, I need early revenue, and I need to figure out what I can scale and what revenue works, and have I got the value right? And then, I'm not making enough money. People who are quite business savvy and then think about their people as a revenue center are a lot more aligned to how that might dynamically function. People who are very empathetic will look at essentially building a network or a family and like making the harmony in it, right? Making the harmony across the different teams, the different managers. People who are leaders come in all shapes and sizes. It's really hard to know what that leader thinks about with people if they're building a lot of an organization.
Do you mind going and explaining deeper the treating people as revenue centers as opposed to cost centers?
Yeah, of course. So most people, when they own a P&L, right? Again, you could be a founder, but you don't have to be. It might be you've just given over the reins to your number two. When you own a P&L, normally, if you look at the costs on your P&L, the biggest cost in a business is people. And so when you start to think about it, and then it's salaries, and then it's bonuses, and then it's progression frameworks, and then it's, well, I give them more money, and all this sort of stuff. Realistically, your human capital is viewed as a cost, and you're trying to figure out the costs. Inverted, upside down, if you view your people as a revenue center, then you're completely aligned to like a value creation per person, and the amount you pay them becomes academic. Like, you've got a runway thing over here that's a separate story you tell yourself, and you need to make sure you run a good business. But viewing people as a revenue center rather than a cost center is a much better way of looking at, do I actually have a great ROI on people? Not, am I spending too much? Do I need to reduce my head count? Like, they're all sort of lagging indicators of a poor way of looking at people in a business.
And then how you assess the ROI of one team member against the other. That's super tricky, right? Engineering versus product versus customer success.
Exactly. So when you start having a big organization of people, this is where really, really good heads of people pay for themselves instantly. They are such incredible humans because they just go, how much ROI am I getting from N, where N is every single individual person in the business? And you can actually walk up to a manager, you can walk up to a founder, you can walk up to anyone and be like, you know what? Don't think we've built the right revenue center for people. I think this person is probably not helping us here. What do you think? They never said costs, they never said salaries, they never said anything other than they view humans and value, and they are intrinsically aligned to optimizing the heck out of it relative to headcount.
Who's an incredible head of people that you admire?
Well, there's a couple of people that are really good at this. So I'm terrible at surnames, but Matt, when he was at Forward Partners, was one of the classics, and he went on to be the chief people officer of List. There's another Matt who runs, I think, People Collective, which is a consultancy that just specializes in people. And then there's a few sort of heads of talent in a couple of venture capital funds as well, where, again, they have their own brands. They don't need to hear me shout about them, but they are also able to educate people on this problem. But it's really tricky. It's really difficult to actually learn this mindset, because the whole time, especially if you're a significant leader, it's P&L, 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 headcounts, cuts, scarcity of capital, runway. So turning all that off is tough. It's a cultural shift.
Yeah, definitely. Going back a little bit about this superstars and rockstars, you said it at the seed stage, if someone just had superstars in their team, it would probably explode, or they'd have to be amazing with people to make it work. What does that look like? Let's assume that someone's thinking, okay, I've got loads of superstars in my team and maybe I'm not managing them in the most effective way possible. What are they doing?
Well, in my opinion, if you have managed to collect, obviously the measure of a great leader is the ability to attract and retain incredible talent. That doesn't mean the tier one. It means incredible talent, so it's fit, right? This would sound like a person who has been unable to attract the right dynamics of talent. And as a proxy of this, they're just waiting for the churn. The attrition will hit them because these people will be unsatisfied and leave. If you've picked the best of the best, they are ultimately employable every single second, right? They will be every day messaged by someone saying, I have another incredible thing you should do. Do you want to come help me? So it will rectify itself, and you just need to learn very quickly that you shouldn't do that. If I'm being very honest, it's a lesson that people learn, right? And that's a classic where you get a ton of money, you pay some really big salaries, you get some big brands, and none of it works. So back to the school of hard knocks, many people just need to actually take a step back and say, did I build an incredible bunch of people, not the people that are the best? What's the balance and dynamics? We can't all be Batman. Some people have to be Robin.
Can you give a hypothetical example of what an org structure, let's say in a Series A company, could look like with a mixture of superstars and rockstars?
Sure. So if you have a Series A business, you're probably pre-product market fit. You have between $10 and $30 million in your bank account, and you probably make commitments to build X amount of capability in your business. That's the setup you'll have as a Series A person. You built something that someone thought was really great, and they want to see what it could become. If we just quickly break that down into a few pieces, one is that if you've got a really good engineering culture, then probably maybe one engineering supersonic person is enough. Great engineering culture means that engineers personally identify with solving the problem and are proactive in addressing it. That doesn't mean a product manager or a founder or anyone comes up to them and says, hey, I think this is the best roadmap. They're like, engineers that are dreaming about how to solve the problems and are proactively doing it, they effectively need a custodian to point them in the right direction. Your engineering culture is the engineering is building its own solutions, right? Engineers build incredible things if they are focused and care about it. If they don't, or you've built the wrong culture or any of the stuff messed up in engineering, they'll sit there and say, what do you want me to do? What's the roadmap? And maybe they'll agree or disagree on how hard something is. That's not a very proactive or engaged person in a business if we play it agnostically, right? So let's assume that you have, and that's a 9 out of 10 hard problem in Europe, because you really do need to find people who think like that relative to your business. It's not just, again, finding the best engineers. It's finding engineers that will genuinely care about the thing where they're going to be proactive in trying to solve it. And they feel like they're empowered to do so. Then one really, really great engineer in that cohort is going to probably be a beacon to tie all of the magic together and keep it moving. Normally at a Series A, the person that owns the product is the founder. So you assume they're pretty good. So you don't need someone doing that. Because speaking frankly, they should be doing it. And then on the other side of it, you've got all of the things that need to happen for the business to grow and for the business to support the people it serves, whether you're a B2B or a B2C. And I think those organizations have their own cultures we could talk about separately. It's quite nuanced. Everyone has engineers, everyone does product. These other ones, sales, account management, marketing, it's all growth complexities. And in the operating side, it's, do you need customer success? Is it fully self-service? Is it, do you actually have human beings walking into buildings to conduct medical experiments? The operations and support bit is its own bunch where at least one very, very, very supersonic person in each of those pieces is enough. If you don't have those well structured, you might need a couple of really good rock stars to bring it along. By the way, because we're talking about this supersonic person, this superstar, they don't have to be the leader of those functions, right? We're just saying there's a little thing inside that's just dynamite.
But I imagine if they're a superstar and their leader is a rock star, then they're more likely to churn because they're looking up and thinking, my manager doesn't know what I'm doing.
It depends. It depends on what, again, that's the whole problem you have, right? Like the understanding of how to manage all these different people is where all the people bits come in. So the actual what makes great managers and like how do you attract and retain talent and like who are your leaders that have people under them, that's all the nitty-gritty of building a good business. So in this case, no, if someone's a great leader, but they know they're not supersonic, but they know exactly what to do with those people, actually that's going to work really well. If your boss is supersonic superstar and you're a supersonic superstar, either you're going to work really well or you're going to rip each other apart, right? Which is where you can sometimes, for example, bring in a supersonic product person, but the founder is supersonic and wants to own product, and the two of them can't figure it out, and it falls apart, which is a classic thing. People sometimes call that founderitis because it's relative to whatever the thing is the founder's doing relative to the superstar, and then they just don't do it because we are making the assumption that all founders are superstars, right?
And you said that founders likely to own products, even at the Series A stage. And then engineers are the other they put on the product hat as well as being engineers because...
Well, again, they put on the product hat in European speak. This is the status quo of who you hire as an engineer in the US. You wouldn't hire delivery people in the US. It's just not a good ROI, right? Maybe when you're Series C and you need C-class engineers, right? But we said Series A. So automatically we're assuming A-class engineers. And A-class engineers do that by default. It just so happens in Europe we have a big problem with both product and engineering diversity in terms of skill, talent, culture. It's a bit of a mess. You have to filter it all out, right? Some of it, half the engineering people and are probably sat in large institutions like banks, large media, Like we built these huge functions in Europe quite notoriously. It's not like we had the competing, they're called the majors, like the Googles, the Facebooks, So there was never a balance. There aren't really any European majors. You could argue a little bit, but nothing to offset the number of people right now writing code in large institutions that are established. So you end up with this really weird complexity of the problem for that kind of talent. Because it's a cultural opposite, right? The bank really doesn't want you to do that. It's a risk-averse entity with thousands and thousands of engineers. I've just picked banks, but most large established institutions. And they don't want you to come up with your own solutions. They don't want you to deviate from the plan. They want you to do exactly what's in line with what we're going to do this year, nothing else.
And so you're probably more likely to find rock stars in large institutions than you are superstars?
Depends. This is the problem, right? This is why when you go to hire people, I personally have no interest in anything on their CV. I would like to meet a person and actually first assess their culture relative to their role and, speaking frankly, their IQ. Like truly brilliant, smart people that have the right culture for the thing they have to do are going to do really well. If they don't have that, nothing else matters. You could work in Google, Bain, or McKinsey. Doesn't. Personally, for me, I think everyone has their different leading indicators for how they can pattern match when it comes to people, because people are a billion different data points. It's so hard to figure people out. So I respect anyone for their own way of solving this problem. There is no stereotype you can apply to where someone came from, unfortunately. the best engineer I ever hired came straight out of Shell, the petrochemical company.
And so then within these sort of three functions, you've got engineering and product, you've got operations and growth. So how you split them up, right?
Yeah, and design sits somewhere in that universe and customer. And again, the problem you have with the setup is I've arbitrarily built a business. Speaking frankly, if your business builds molecules, don't know how much of that's relevant. So it's unfair to say there's one way to do it.
Of course. But within each of whatever main function drives your business, there's ideally a superstar somewhere, a couple of rock stars, and then a couple of other people? Or is it keep it as lean as possible, you're only hiring superstars and rock stars?
Back to the class of people, yeah? So we are specifically talking about the story of how a wonderful Series A business would operate. And that's what we've talked about. You need A-class people. So there's no room really for anyone who's not in a category where you can clearly define them as a superstar or a rock star.
Fine.
Series C+, I mean, when you have 500 people to hire in 6 months, I will eat my hat if you can do that with superstars and rock stars exclusively. That is a monumental scaling problem.
Okay. And sadly, we don't have time to go into today, but maybe one for a part two. Last question.
Mm-hmm.
What does failure mean to you?
When I think about what failure means to me, it's probably the most exciting thing you can ask me about, if I'm honest.
Glad I saved it to last then.
Yeah, I think, well, what's success? Success means you thought something was going to be done and it was going to work and it did. Therefore, you learned nothing other than probably your ego was going to go up by one data point. So if you're a human being who only ever had that, you had no opportunity to be humble and you had no opportunity to learn. You actually just ran a playbook where you'll fall off a cliff one day because reality will hit you. So I think personally, failure is the most fun thing I can do. I get really excited about it. I love talking about it. I've made so many mistakes. And when people listen to my stories, because speaking frankly, that's kind of how the narrative works, they benefit from it. But they only benefit like 1% of the 99% I got out of doing it. So I am really excited about all the stuff I'm going to mess up in future. I get really, really excited about all the things I'm going to do wrong because it means I still have so much room to learn. Obviously, it kind of hurts. Obviously, no one likes to fail. I do have a slightly weird mind in terms of how I approach this, but I've picked myself up so many times now, I'm not worried about whether I can pick myself up. Ignoring all the buzzwords. I'm just really excited that I'm going to fail soon because then I can look at it and be like, all right, so how many times is that going to change the things I do going forward? Because I normally think in sort of like, a day, a year, 10 years, 50 years. And so when you fail, the repercussion that ripples through you can be pretty cool. On a personal level, I'm likely to lose buying a house today. And I'm really excited about this because it's going to completely change how I think about the approach I have with properties.
Okay.
And so I'm like, oh, okay. What a relief.
So what are a couple of principles that you apply to enjoying failure or just maybe approaching failure that someone else might be able to adopt?
I think so I'm going to offer a paradoxical one. When you fail, don't think about it too much. I think people get very stuck. And when something happens to me, it's crisis mode. You can actually see it. I've done the BPMs. My BPMs like halve when I'm in a failure state. It's almost like the pulses just drop. And I'll deal with the crisis and I'll fail and then it'll come back to normal. And obviously it's only for a fixed duration, but you can actually watch it. It's quite interesting. So when you end up in a failure mode, try not to think about it. Just do it. Second thing is obviously after the fact, spend a lot of time thinking about what it meant. And I personally, especially in some of my greatest failures, and some of them have been horrendous both personally and professionally, normally around some time I'll have got some post-its and I've written down what I thought. And then me, like a month or two later, will look at that and go, that's completely wrong. And I would never have been able to take that out of the failure if I hadn't done it. One of my greatest failings was in a business where it's a long story, it was very painful, I won't share, but I wrote down all of these things that I thought were the problem.
I'd love you to share.
And then in future, I look back and I even showed them to someone and they went, those are the things that make you great, right? And it was a quite significant entrepreneur. He's like, you understand that now. And I'm like, yeah, at the time I didn't. I thought that was all the stuff I had to change. And it's just showing you the massive delta on when you're in failure, all the self-doubts, repercussions, the information you're going to pass versus you retrospecting it with some way of referencing it. Maybe you're really good at your memory and you can just live that again and again in a non-traumatic sense. But you actually, in terms of coping and building on failure, I think it's, when you fail, try not to think about it, just deal with it. And then have some way of not retrospecting, but just holding on to more than one moment of that failure.
And you don't want to share one of your big failures?
One day. Some people know me. If you can find me and if I end up on an advisory board or a mentoring of someone, that story comes up because it's the single best story I can tell someone intimately, where they can then ask me, but what do you do? And I can say, you can't do anything. But I always am willing to do it with people where I spend time because I do think it helps ground them, mostly because most people who choose to build companies more than once, and you can choose to be a serial VP of startups, right? It's just as spiritual, let's be honest. When you commit a career to that, you really have to have had some moments where you've just picked yourself up enough to go, all right, I can do this for 40, 50, 60 years. No problem. No problem now. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been incredible. You are so concise and articulate, which I think only comes from a lot of experience and a lot of reflection, and a lot of failures, and a lot of time in the trenches. So thank you so much for coming and sharing.
A pleasure. Anytime I can be helpful.